Welcome to the Curiosity Crisis. We challenge ourselves to explore the world of business, tech, investing, and science. Get curious and be part of our journey as we discuss, challenge, and learn.
The renewed space race is increasingly driven by private companies rather than just by government efforts. Firms like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Rocket Lab are leading the charge. These companies are transforming the economics of space exploration through innovation, technology, and making space more accessible and financially viable. We're really keen to dive into that today. So, Lukey, how you going?
Very well, thank you. We should start off as usual, I think. What's keeping you curious, Kush?
Yeah, of course. Mate, mine's pretty clean and simple today. I am running my first marathon ever tomorrow, and I'm nervous and excited, and I'm very curious. Particularly what I've been thinking about is the wall. When am I going to hit the Hurt Locker? I've done some long runs. I've trained. I'm feeling okay, pretty good. Obviously, I just don't know what happens on the day, so that is what I'm curious about. Like, where do I feel the pain, and how do I deal with it, and how do I get through? So, very, very excited, and I think on the next episode, hopefully when I make it through, I'll be able to tell you how it goes, but very interested.
Yeah, well, good luck. I'm sure it won't be quite as bad as you think. You've trained pretty hard, I know.
Yeah. No, but I'm excited, and I've obviously taken a few lessons from the ones you've done, so thanks for that. But
yeah, that's right.
Mate, what's keeping you curious?
Well, honestly, I'd like to say this episode. I'm actually really excited about this space stuff, but I'll give you something unrelated to the episode because we'll crack in and then it won't be as relevant. So for me, similar marathon training. I was supposed to be doing one as well with you tomorrow, but I've injured my ITB, my IT band. So anyway, basically, I'm doing some exercise and stuff to fix that, and I can't run, which is a little bit annoying. But I also have some potential nerve damage, and no. I've been given what's called neural flossing to fix it, and I didn't know this existed. But you basically, my understanding of it anyway, is you're like assisting the nerve connection between wherever the injury is in your brain, and you have specific exercises based on where the issue is. Anyway, I didn't know it existed, and I thought it was really random.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so I'm going to look up a bit about it and how it works. But it's been keeping me curious because I have to do it. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't know. I guess movement and trying to be healthy is keeping us curious, for sure.
Yeah,
good.
Exactly.
But good luck with the recovery.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of hopping right in, when people think of space, they usually think of NASA, they think of the Soviets, and that's what happens when we talk about the space race. We talk about, the race to the moon, but that's not what it is today. What's changed? What is it today?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I suppose NASA and the Soviet Union, you think straight to governments and national interests and stuff like that, but really the game is now, it's private. It's private companies, not just governments. So some of the names we introduced at the start of the episode, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, these are some of the big names pushing the boundaries. And essentially, I mean, obviously governments still have a skin in the game and they're really keen to explore and learn what's out there. But it's the private sector, just like in, I guess, on Earth's economies, that's leading with innovation and better economics. And I guess it's because space is becoming and being identified as really profitable. So these companies and governments see major opportunities. So, yeah.
And actually, funny enough, like NASA, for example, now contract to private companies. They pay like a SpaceX to do something for them, which is, that's a really interesting
and
shift
we'll talk about it later, but I'm learning so many of the parallels between, how economies and things have gone on Earth, and now it's just scaling that model to space, which is wild.
Yeah. It's the same thing.
So I guess one thing that's absolutely been the big change is the tech improvements is right at the heart of it. So what are some of the key breakthroughs that are making space more accessible and affordable?
Yeah, so I think something to keep in mind is that these space companies are startups. They are funded, they're given VC money, they show their economic plan of what they're trying to do and how they're doing it better than everyone else, and then they implement it. And so there's been a lot of technology changes on just the way that startups move is they move really fast. And something that we've seen come out of that is fail-fast engines. So companies like Rocket Lab, for example, they have smaller, more powerful engines that they can test and iterate on really quickly. and it gives them a rapid innovation cycle, especially compared to the traditional rockets. And something that a lot of people might not know is that, like NASA, for example, would actually buy an entire rocket. They would pay for, hey, we want this thruster. The entire thruster gets made, slapped into the rocket, and then they go to space. And now the difference is companies build them in-house. And these guys specifically will build lots of little rockets, test them really fast, get really like powerful rockets, and then they combine them to get the thrust. So they're actually much more efficient, and it helps them beat out their competitors, right? And then that helps them get contracts, whether it's with government or whatever. And so I think it's just important to like kind of think of these as, like think of it like a fast-paced startup.
And I guess they're learning lessons from other tech and stuff on Earth. Like it's modular and scalable. Like, and that's how a lot of the tech here has gone.
Exactly.
Space.
Yeah, 100%. And like lots of really smart people have moved from like nuclear to kind of space startups, or maybe from maybe the chemistry of EVs or whatever it is. So another good example is 3D printing rockets. Rocket Lab do it with their Rutherford rocket, and Relativity Space does it with Terran R, which is also a 3D printed rocket. And something to note is Relativity Space, their 3D printed rocket, they're trying to do 95% of the rocket 3D printed. So that's like all the tubes and everything is all built into the thruster, and then it's the entire like shell of the rocket.
Yeah. So you save a lot of like material and production time, and if it's all together as well, there's other properties that you can get out of not building everything, I guess, on its own.
Yeah, I think there's like a number of things that play in there. It helps you build a bigger rocket without pieces, because you can have the 3D printer itself move. So you could make something that's, hypothetically 50 meters long. I'm not exactly sure how long it is, without having to have 10-meter segments that you add together. It lets you build a lot faster, which means that if you have a rocket blow up, you get the learnings from that. What happened, what went well, what went wrong. And then you can build another rocket faster. So again, it helps that like iteration cycle, and just the production time as well. And so, it's really interesting, like all these small innovations. Another really big one has been modeling and simulation. So that's like physics simulation, the digital side of it, to help test and iterate on rockets and engines and everything. That has cut down time a lot. And that one's a really obvious one, right? Because you compare like the 1960s to now. Obviously, we have way more compute power. Way more smarts. And so it makes a lot of sense that would be a huge boost in terms of like R&D essentially. And I think the really big one has been reusable rockets, and that's come from SpaceX. So the Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy are reusable rockets. So they can launch multiple times, they can land, and I think that's been a real game changer in terms of the economic side.
Yeah, because I guess like you said before, NASA, they used to use rockets and like buy them in, build them, and then they're a one-time use. So the cost per flight to space was just incredible. And I guess is what else has reusable rockets, I guess, enabled for the industry?
So I think like the cost saving one's the really obvious one. Is like if you don't have to build a new rocket every launch. One is that launch itself doesn't matter as much. If something like you launch off to space, if something doesn't go well, it's okay. The rocket returns. It's not a complete waste of resources. That's a big one. But the other thing is, you also have like more frequent and affordable launches. So it's like the frequency of being able to send rockets to space is now a thing, right? Because you don't have to build a whole new rocket every time.
Exactly.
And so that allows for like smaller missions where you don't quite have to optimize the same amounts of things as you would previously. Especially because you can just calculate it and go, yep, this is economically viable. We'll do this. And then we'll just do it again when the rocket lands. And so what you have is, for example, SpaceX launching heaps and heaps of satellites to then do global internet. Like that was not affordable before. You could not do that. And obviously they're funded by venture capital, but that's something that just didn't exist before. So it's enabling a bunch of things. Space tourism, again, you're not going to throw a rocket away after you give some billionaire a joyride to the moon. Now you actually can just reuse that rocket, which is really cool.
I think it's really interesting as well, because it parallels, and I keep paralleling it to industries on the ground here on Earth. It's so weird to say, but like that's now just the model of airlines, except out in space, I guess.
I think something else is like it really encourages risk taking.
Yeah.
So like, you know, billions of dollars is a lot of money, especially
Yeah.
if you're trying to get funding and you don't have a lot to show for it. But if you can launch rockets in the millions or the tens or hundreds of millions, it's much more affordable for venture capital. It's much more, the barrier of entry for a startup to do a space do a space startup is just much lower. It's much more achievable. And so that encourages risk taking, which also means that you have these bolder, crazier ideas. And like, even if only some of them work, they might be the game changer for the next iteration of rockets, right?
And I guess it's just also the headspace, or like the thinking behind, you know, when you have one of these missions, obviously it's a criticality point. Like if it fails launching off Earth, that's an issue. But in the past, I guess, like spaceflight it was one and done. It was like one,
Exactly.
and it was going to fail, and that was it, and you accepted it.
Exactly.
So there was so much pressure to get it right at one time. But now with these, I guess you will be able to try them. You can have a fleet of rockets, and you're not just burning through them every time you launch. So. Yeah.
And I think for anyone who's familiar with space, if you think about that with the Apollo missions, where you have like iteration after iteration where the entire mission essentially fails, right? You know, you have a blow up, it failed, people died, no more rocket. It completely changes the economics, right? Because if we take SpaceX as a case study here, you have all this money that gets fed in, and you have them blowing up rockets and getting learnings, but they haven't achieved anything. And eventually you pass that threshold, right? Where you're like, you just had a successful launch and a successful land. That's it. You can do it again. And so for context, one of the SpaceX rockets that's been delivering their SpaceX satellites, it was used like for over 80 launches or something. And so like, that's just unheard of until recently, right? Is like the idea of one rocket goes to space and then that's it, versus like you can pour money into something, but once you break that threshold of this is now a reusable rocket, you get 80 launches out of it, which is completely different. It completely changes the economics of the whole system.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You just rely on it. You can build a bit of a business plan behind that, you know, that asset.
Exactly.
It's not just completely burnable or depletable.
Yeah, so I think all of these things kind of play into the whole technology stuff, but they've really changed, like the technology has really changed the economy side of it. And then obviously, I guess the economy side has also changed the technology side. So I guess if I throw it back to you, let's talk about that in terms of the space economy.
Yes.
So why is everyone jumping into space? So like what economic opportunities are out there? And what makes it $1 trillion economy? Like how does that even make sense?
Well, the interesting thing is, and I think you've really framed it well, is it's a back and forth. It's a cycle, right? So the tech gets better, which makes it cheaper and more economically viable to go out to space. And then because it gets it more economically viable, people are willing to explore different ideas out there. And then back and forth it goes. So like the more economic opportunity there is out there, the more people are willing to innovate and put money into the back and forth. Anyway, so that's where we're at. There's a few massive things, and would be probably front of mind to some of our listeners. So it's interesting. There's real life use cases here on Earth that people are really going out into space to realize. And the first and most obvious, I guess, is internet, global internet. So most people would have heard of SpaceX's Starlink. A lot of people would have heard of Amazon's Project Kuiper. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. But basically they're launching thousands of satellites out into space for global internet, and it's all about providing internet to remote regions. And obviously these companies are targeting, you know, lots of money and revenue, and that comes from the just supporting the economy here on Earth. So that's something that, you know, was there before, obviously provided by, you know, your regular telecom businesses, but now it's really changing the model. Space tourism, obviously we've talked about that. Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic is selling trips out to space. Right now they're very expensive and for wealthy people, but you know, as that comes down, it could be a thing that people are like, damn, I want to go on a holiday. Let's go out to space.
Yeah, the new cool theme park.
Exactly. One that I'm pretty interested in and has probably been in the news a little bit is asteroid mining, or just mining out in space on some of the different planets, even mining on the moon. But there's companies like Astroforge that are looking to extract rare minerals and precious metals out from space. And this is also very useful for the economy here down on Earth, because these minerals are used in technology, electronics, and green materials from the energy transition. things like platinum are from asteroids and can come from asteroids. And if they crack into this, and like at the moment it's obviously pretty early days, but is where the $1 trillion figure sort of comes in.
Yeah.
In fact, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, like, just noting that as well. Like, we always think of things within the system that we currently have. So, like, for example, we've done, this series on energy.
Yep.
And I remember when I was really young, there was a day a year where they would turn off all lights, right? And to try and save energy. I can't remember what it was called. Something Earth Day.
Earth Day, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and so, like, the idea was, if we use less energy, we can save the Earth. And that's kind of like flipped on its head, where it's like, actually, renewables can create an abundance economy where it completely shifts, how much energy we have and how everything works. And I think this is a similar thing where we currently think of like rare earth metals as rare.
Yes.
But one day they might not be rare. And so what seems absurd to use like gold or what is it? Silver is the best conductivity conductor. You could use silver for things that you would traditionally use aluminium for.
Yeah.
Like you could have scenarios that can just completely change the way we use our metals. And I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and it would I guess optimize it so much, but it just has to be realized out from space. So like those are like the massive pitch ideas that I guess these companies are chasing out there, and that's where the trillions come in. I'll give you one, Lukey. There's apparently an asteroid out there called 16 Psyche that's supposedly worth more than the GDP of Earth. Like one asteroid,
That's a bit.
you extract that, and then I guess some of the more. Oh, actually, on energy generation, you mentioned it. There's also space-based solar power. So solar rays in orbit collect energy and beam it back to Earth, and obviously out in space it's like the rays are way more intense,
way higher. Yeah.
I haven't gone through layers and layers of ozone and stuff like that, so that's been explored as a renewable energy source for the planet. And then just a couple of other things. One that really caught my eye, there's a concept of space-based manufacturing. So because of obviously the properties out in space where there's little to zero gravity relative to Earth, you can make products, certain pharmaceuticals or crystals that just can't be made on Earth because you have that zero gravity manufacturing opportunity. And there's also for example, there's a company called Made in Space that's pioneering 3D printing out in orbit. So opening new possibilities out there, which is it's kind of hard to conceptualize, but that's being worked on, which is really, really cool. And then I guess the final one is Axiom Space, for example, are building a commercial space station. So obviously there's the International Space Station that we know about, and there's a few national interest space agencies building space stations, but they're obviously traditionally for research and collaboration between nations and stuff like that. But now there's ones for commercial use, so they could be used as research hubs or manufacturing sites or even, destinations on your trip out to space. So yeah, it's kind of wild, but there's a lot going on.
Just a quick intermission. Thanks so much for listening. If we could just ask a quick favor, if you could send this to a friend and recommend it, we would greatly appreciate it. It's easy to do and it helps the show out. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating because as a listener you're going to hear us talk about economic viability a lot throughout this, and I think that's the key. It's like you break that threshold and suddenly all these random possibilities now exist, and so I think it's almost like everyone's searching for the killer app, right?
Yeah.
And at the moment that might be like internet or something, but down the line, if there's something really valuable to people on Earth that we can only manufacture in space, suddenly you found your killer app. That means we have to go to space, we have to make this stuff and send it back because, I don't know, it cures cancer, hypothetically, or whatever it is, right?
No, literally.
And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting is that you have all these startups searching for that kind of killer app. And yeah, it's such a cool system.
I love just the big thinking aspect of it. People it's excuse the pun, but they're literal moonshots. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So and then but when the tech sort of makes it more economically viable, you probably start to think about them a little bit more seriously as you go. Anyway, I've talked a lot about the economic side, but obviously government still sees space as a necessity strategically.
Yeah.
What's the big picture here when it comes to space and national interest and national security?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously we can't talk about all of this private stuff without talking about a little bit of public and national strategic interests. So I think just touching on kind of the biggest one that affects us all is satellites, right? It's a key for communication. It is how GPS works. It is intelligence. So, from a organizational standpoint of, looking after a nation's security interests, your satellites mean a lot. And I think something just to touch on here as well is that there's often a lot of negative connotations around the money that gets poured into space. When, we look at something like NASA and people go, why are we exploring space when we have so much we need to do here on Earth? But it's not really how it works. Like, they go hand in hand. And like a great example is that like GPS wouldn't exist without NASA, and they spend a lot of their money on maintaining things that help everyday people all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's not about necessarily like going and landing on the moon and walking around and then coming back. It's about like the technologies that really do change the world. Anyway, we don't need to get into that, but I just think that like it's important to remember that there is real tangible benefit to the way that this money ends up being spent. And if it doesn't get spent in the first place there, it won't ever happen.
Well, I just chucked 2 more quick examples: telecommunications and internet. Like, that's
exactly.
So
100%. So I think so. Satellite interest is huge. Everyone wants satellites. They don't necessarily need to be for spying, but it's just that communication is massive. That's super important, and obviously satellite is accessible anywhere in the world, so that changes things. So then there's the military domain. So everyone wants to secure their nation, and so having that, like, you need to secure your positions of orbit. You need to make sure that you have that locked down and no one can kind of change that. And so because of that, things have stemmed called ASAT, which is anti-satellite weapons. And so countries are investing heavily in systems to protect and disable other satellites in case there is a conflict. So that's been like a real point of interest for militaries is even if we don't need to use this now, we want to. And then obviously there's control of lunar resources. So if these things become super valuable, you want a competitive edge. And so the future of that technology, it means like your country's economy could be tied to it. It could be, from a national interest in terms of security. Yep. And I think something else to remember is that obviously we think about space and no one owns that, right? You go to space, no one owns the moon, for example. But also no one really owns their country, right? It's just land that you happen to occupy and you say, this is ours now. And so it's the same with space, is that even though everyone kind of agrees no one owns it, if you get there first and say, we own this now, no one can really do anything about it unless they fight you over it.
Well, one thing we decided not to go deep on this episode on was like I think there's this thing called the Artemis Accord, and like there's other international things that people have tried to progress about going out into space. But I completely agree with you. I guess like if you go back into history and how countries and empires used to be built and expanded and taken over and stuff like that, there is these I guess agreements or like things that people are signatories to. But at the end of the day, like, I feel, this is a personal opinion, if there's something stupidly valuable and economically viable found out in space, I think it might change to a who gets there first type operation.
Well, that's kind of what I was alluding to. Yeah. It's like at the moment, everyone's in agreement, but I think that things might not necessarily stay that way as, it's such a rapid pace. But I think there's just a lot of things that all play into that. And so national strategic interests really align with going to space and doing things there. Yep. So if we go back to this new space race, there's a lot of like unexpected players in this race. So like, what are the most surprising developments? As a listener may have not heard a lot of about these, but there's just been a lot of change.
Yeah, I guess the headline story, and we've talked about it so far and dropped a few names, but there's private lunar landers, so there's private companies obviously going out to space, and more companies like, for example, Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines are making the moon more accessible for private exploration and potentially mining. Again, there's that question out there. But then I'll give you 3 quick examples of, to me, were new and unexpected players and developments out in the space race. India's space success, so the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, I think that's what it is. Their Chandrayaan-3 and Mangalyaan missions have put India on the map. So they've gone out into space and achieved that on relatively small budgets, which is actually really cool. Good to see that, that innovation is also driving down costs for countries that haven't previously been out there. The UAE had a Hope Mars mission, so it was the first I think, Arab country to go out into space and map around Mars, which she ended up, improving the maps and our understanding about there. And then one that's been pretty widely talked about is China's Tiangong space station. So that'll be fully operational soon and potentially becoming a hub for international research. There's a little bit, and I know we chose not to go specifically into the national interest and butting of heads, but that's open to a large range of countries. But as you can imagine, I don't think it's open to the US. So that's where some of that sort of starts coming into play. So where it was previously purely, international cooperation out in space, now it's sort of becoming a bit more nationalized out there. So some interesting developments and just cool things to, I guess, keep your eye on when you think about what's happening in space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mate, we've gone through a lot and we're just about at time, but so much interesting stuff to get into. I want to ask, what's one thing that you'll take away out of this whole discussion?
Yeah, I think we always think of space as just like this slow-moving, government kind of fueled, wasteful thing. I think is like I feel like that's the stigma that came out of the 60s.
Yeah,
and I think having we've gone through this research and what you and I have dug up. The way I read this is things are not like that anymore. It's really fast moving. There's a lot of interest from a lot of different parties. And so this stuff will continue to innovate and grow. And I really think this isn't a race that ends. I don't think we do this space race and then everyone decides, oh, this wasn't worth it. I don't think it's the objective where let's get to the moon and then let's do less. I think this is here to stay now and it's going to continue to grow. And I think it's a really interesting industry. I think it's fantastic. It's just really, it's amazing. What about you?
Mate, I learned so much out of doing this, and I think it's one of the things that stuck out to me is that private companies that previously I'd never heard of are operating in space and communicating that in just ways that seem so natural and so normal. Like we're talking about them building industries, doing really, really interesting things out in space as if they were just like a company down here that we could research and get into. But in reality, that's sort of what it is. Like, as space goes from this whole government big strategic interest thing into private, it's real and economic forces of capitalism that are just out and play in space. Yeah. And that could really result in mammoth things. Like, I think there's been tons of progress made. And as you say, I think it continues to accelerate. And I'm trying to figure out whether they're just big step changes or they're just order of magnitude changes. But there is a lot going on out there, and I think it's something that we just continue to hear about. And maybe right now it's not front of mind for people, but when you start receiving goods that can be said that are made or produced out in space rather than out in Earth, and who knows how far away that is, but it'll start becoming very real. So
100%.
Incredibly interesting. And imagine going for a little trip around the moon. That could be pretty fun, just as a holiday. So
maybe add it to the bucket list.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Maybe in our lifetime.
All right. Thanks.
Epic. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Find us at curiositycrisis.com and Curiosity Crisis on Instagram or on all major streaming services so you can listen how you like. Asking you a favor, if you got anything out of this episode, please give us a 5-star review. It helps us get found by the next person. So thank you, Lukey, and catch you on the next one.
Awesome. Thank you.